So first, Janire Castellano Bueno will present a historical overview of animal welfare. Dr. Castellano Bueno is the outreach manager at Wild Animal Initiative. She received her PhD in animal welfare and effective neuroscience from the University of Newcastle, where she focused on the assessment of the long-term welfare of laboratory macaques using a multidisciplinary approach. She has extensive experience in primate welfare and behavior, as well as in statistical modeling. And Dr. Castellano Bueno, we look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. So I'm gonna share my screen. Can I first make sure that you can all see my screen?
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So yeah, thank you, Anne. So in this first talk of the second session, I wanted to cover really just a brief overview of the historical evolution of animal welfare. So first of all, I want to say that my focus will be here on Western society, because these are the main ideologies that have shaped the legislation of animal welfare in the West. But of course, this means that there are other parts of the world history relevant to animal welfare that I will be missing. So I will start with 5 of the main figures that shape the current ideas on animal treatment and welfare. And for that, we begin with Aristotle, who, despite lecturing on zoology, emphasized reason as the pinnacle of human abilities, establishing a hierarchical structure that gave humans absolute authority over animals. So during this time, the Roman era, there was extreme cruelty to animals in circuses and on other avenues, revealing a clear lack of concern for their well-being. And this didn't change much for almost millennium. After when we have Saint Thomas de Aquino, who merged the Aristotelian ideas with Christian beliefs. And while he agreed with Aristotle on reason as the distinguishing feature of humans, Aquino also added a Christian twist, positioning that animals lack immortal souls and asserting that humans have no direct obligation towards them. And according to Aquinas, animals don't have any more standing and they only have instrumental value. However, he did acknowledge that some indirect moral obligations, arguing that mistreatment of animals could lead to cruel habits towards humans. And this is quite interesting because in that respect, at least, Aquinas was correct. Recent research has shown that people who are maliciously cruel to animals early in life are at a greater risk of being cruel to people later in life. Then we have Descartes, often deemed as the father of modern philosophy, who introduced the controversial concepts of animals as automata or machines. And while he denied animals' conscious thoughts, contemporary scholars debate to which extent he actually believed it, if animals had emotions or not. Then we move into the 17th century, again, not much changing until then. We start with Thomas Hobbes, where in his influential work in the Leviathan, he contended that animals lacking language for social contracts were not worthy of any moral consideration. And at the same time, we have John Locke, who was a British empiricist, and who challenged this rigid view by acknowledging animals' capacity for memory and some simple ideas. And he made departure from this more prevalent notion idea from animals as mere machines, since in his perspective, he hinted at a more understanding of animal cognition. And then really going back to where we started, we have Immanuel Kant, who is a really significant figure in moral philosophy, and maintained the traditional view that animals have only instrumental value. He argued that morality is adhering to absolute rules, and as animals lack the capacity for ethical reasoning, then they only possess choice. So in summary, these 5 philosophers played a really important role in shaping this traditional Western stance on animal treatment. And they are rooted in the claims that humans don't have any moral obligations towards animals. And this perspective really dominated for centuries. Although it's still interesting how Locke's divergence from this viewpoint actually reflects some early recognition in the distinction between animals and humans, and reflects that that differentiation might not be as clear-cut as what his contemporaries suggested. Then we move to more, there is a transition during the Enlightenment in Europe. There is a shift in perspective towards animals, and we start with David Hume, who was a Scottish philosopher, and who challenged the idea that animals lack a moral standing, emphasizes their ability to learn from experience. So Hume was an atheist and didn't consider the questions of an immortal soul, so this was not a problem. Then we have Jeremy Bentham, an English social reformer in the Industrial Revolution, who emphasized that the outcomes of actions over theoretical principles. And he disagreed with earlier philosophers who considered criteria like reason or language for moral consideration. And instead, he argued a very famous question that I'm sure that you all heard about, that the question is not can they reason nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And then John Stuart Mill, influenced by Bentham, further developed this utilitarianism, asserting that actions are right if they promote happiness and wrong if they lead to unhappiness. And this became known as the greatest happiness principle, a term adopted from the writings of the Scottish novelist John Galt. So the Enlightenment had a huge impact in the views of animal welfare. It really challenges traditional views on animal ethics and introduced a more compassionate perspective with this legacy on utilitarianism from Bentham and Mill. So then there was a change in the period. So what we now call scientists started to be interested in this topic. So we have a very famous Darwin's insight in his book from 1872, in the expressions of the emotions in man and animals, where he explored more universal aspects of emotion expression of our species, emphasizing the anatomical and physiological basis, signal value, and evolutionary aspect of emotions. And while Darwin hinted at subjective experiences, it was actually Georgian Romance, a disciple of Darwin, who explicitly addressed the subjective nature of feelings in his 83 book, The Mental Evolution of Animals, suggesting that pleasures and pains evolve to guide beneficial or harmful processes in organisms. But actually, even if Darwin's work is way more famous, the veterinarian William Judd, predating Darwin's work, wrote extensively of animal sentience in his book in 1839, addressing various aspects of animal welfare. He recognized animals' senses, emotions, consciousness, memory, and moral qualities, and he emphasized the shared capacity for pleasure and pain between humans and animals. He even condemned some inhumane practices, many of which are still actually debated today. So until here, we can start with a very early acknowledgement of emotions, but even if they acknowledge these emotions, how did they actually assess them? So this was really mostly based on anthropocentric and not very reliable interpretation of their behavior, as until then, welfare was really equated to physical health, both in human and non-human animals, and therefore not having observable diseases or injuries was sufficient to be said that they had good welfare. So even if we have some more value of emotions, we have no way of assessing that. So when does the interest in objective assessment of welfare start? When does this animal welfare science actually starts? And the answer is that it doesn't start for a while. So this delayed emergence of animal welfare science, this acknowledgement of animals having feeling for over 130 years, it can be mainly attributed to the rise of behaviorism in the early 20th century. Behaviorism is a psychological branch developed in the US that rejects subjective phenomena, championing an objective approach to studying behavior. Here we have William James and G.B. Watson, who are key figures in behaviorism and dismiss concepts like consciousness and emotions as non-entities. So Watson, regarded as the father of behaviorism, emphasized the elimination of subjective terms from the scientific vocabulary, and Skinner, known from the operant conditioning chamber of the Skinner box, contributed techniques for objectively measuring behavior. So despite their scientific significance, behaviorists, including figures like Skinner, largely disregarded animal subjective experiences. And this rejection the subjective considerations by the behaviorists had a huge impact on the field of animal behavior and also discipline parallel in Europe, pathology, and the avoidance of exploring animal subjective experience by behavioral scientists delayed the formalization of animal welfare science for 80 or 100 years. However, while this was happening in the US, we also see some progress in the European views on legislation. The early act of the 1911 in the UK already recorded the mental side of welfare by including words such as infuriate and terrify when they address the animal's suffering. So they start addressing the mental states. But it wouldn't be until decades later that the UK legislation focuses on the psychological side of animal welfare by separately defining mental suffering and stress caused by non-physical origin. Some of the landmark publications during this time were the Committee on Cruelty to Wild Animals and the Departmental Committee on Experiments in Animals. And notably, a cornerstone for this change is in the regulation was the publication of Animal Machines in the 1964 by Ruth Harrison, a book that aimed to expose the reality of animals' lives in intensive poultry and livestock farming. So what happened for the creation of this book was that following World War II, there was a significant change in animal agriculture, which was mainly driven by demand for affordable food, which led to the fast industrialization of production. These changes, mostly done within closed housing methods, became apparent with her book in the 1964, and this triggered a substantial public outcry. Harrison criticized various intensive production methods, emphasizing the negative subjective states and suffering experienced by these animals, and the public response. So in the 1970s, the prevailing scientific view linked with animal welfare was linked primarily with stress, and it was reflected in publications at the time by recent researchers like Verham. However, this shifted with Donald Griffin's book in the 1976, that's called The Question of Animal Awareness, which legitimized the considerations of animal subjective experiences, opening some new avenues for research in animal welfare. And subsequently, a growing body of literature also explored sentience in and welfare with works from authors like Dawkins or Duncan. And then at the same time, there started to be more ethical discussions on animal use. And this gained momentum, especially initiated by the Australian philosopher Peter Singer, who known for promoting a more utilitarian approach to animal welfare. And in his book, Animal Liberation in the 1975 and the subsequent editions, he challenged various forms of animal use, arguing that humane treatment and painless death. And he's acknowledged to be a key figure also in the development of animal rights. And then another philosopher, Tom Regan, expanded on Singer's work, presenting the philosophy of animals' rights in his book in the 1983, The Case for Animal Rights, where he argues that all sentient beings possess inherent value, advocating for equal respect and avoidance of harm. So basically, after all these changes, in the public, this also happened at the same time as there was way more understanding of mental health in humans. So it was heavily influenced by this understanding of mental diseases in humans. So as I mentioned before, traditionally you would only treat what you would see, and after this 20th century, there was more understanding of mental states, and this evolved both for humans. So as a conclusion, there was a huge evolution in the thought in animal welfare. So historically, animal sentience was often overlooked, with focus primarily on behavioral and physiological aspects. And there's this change acknowledging the cognitive and emotional lives of animals. So also transitioning from a more reductionist view to a more holistic understanding of welfare, changing from mere observation to considering also the subjective experiences. So this recognition of animal sentience was also permeated with a public awareness that sparked lots of discussions on ethical treatment. So society played a vital role here too. So now continuing with the historical evolution, I mentioned that the book by Ruth had a huge impact, created a public backlash. And this prompted the British government to establish the Committee of Inquiry that was chaired by Professor Rogers Bramble, which resulted in the Bramble Report in 1965, and acknowledged concerns about animal welfare in intensive production system, but very importantly highlighted a lack of robust scientific evidence in many instances. So the committee recognized the importance of considering both the physical and mental well-being of animals, and stated that welfare assessment should encompass scientific evidence derived from animals' structure, functions, and behavior, but emphasizing the significance of their feelings. So this report is actually called the Report of the Technical Committee to Inquire into the Welfare of Animals and Their Intensive Livestock Husbandry System. So a pretty long title, but mainly focused on farming. And this report establishes a fundamental principle. This is that an animal should at least have sufficient freedom of movement to be able to, without difficulty, turn around, groom itself, get up, lie down, and stretch its legs. So not a lot to ask for. But then in the 79, this evolved into what we now call the 5 Freedom Framework. And this was created to ensure the mental and physical needs of all animals. And these 5 freedoms are freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, or disease, freedom to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear and distress. And then this framework was extended to further develop what is included in the last term, the fear and distress, to emphasize also positive welfare by Miller and Basoleil. And then Dawkins went also a step further by not only including the mental well-being in the definition of the welfare, but also stating that good welfare requires that animals experience positive emotions and have what they want. And over the last 2 decades, multiple other frameworks and definitions of animal welfare have been developed depending on the aim of interest. So Fraser combines some of these with a 3-dimensional approach by defining welfare according to the 3 components. The animal's normal biological function, which would refer to the physical state, the animal's emotional state, and also the animal's ability to express natural behaviors. So to develop this extended list of terms within the distress domain, behavioral, physiological, and neuroscience studies were considered, and they divided this into 2 groups: states that are linked with internally generated inputs and states linked with external circumstances. And these frameworks contributed to the origin of research into the internal states of animals. So at this time, other sciences considered more serious, consider the hard sciences, start to be more interested in stress regulation. And with the help of more multidisciplinary and collaborative approach, they start to create these more foundational definitions and methods. And as part of those foundational definitions, we have affective states. So from human studies, human studies has shown that these states have a valence that can be positive or negative and can also differ in arousal, therefore describing affective states with 2 underlying dimensions, and that can help researchers conceptualize the structure of internal experiences. We also start with the development of more reliable indicators, and we start to focus on validity and feasibility. So in humans, the most reliable method to assess affective states is self-report, but as we cannot do this in non-human animals, we need other types of reliable measures, and the development of those really starts around this time. And this is when what the animal science as we know it now really starts to develop more significantly. There is a huge increase in the number of publications in welfare science, animal welfare science. So this is the proportion of animal welfare related publications each year relative to the total number of publications. We see multiple organizations funding, advising, and doing research in welfare. But however, everything I've been discussing so far is really regarding to animals and their direct human care. These are animals in labs, companion animals, animals used for farming and entertainment purposes, which covers less than 0.01% of animals worldwide. So there is another 99.99% of animals that we consider wild, for which until this point there has been no real consideration in terms of their welfare, no study for it. And for this, I want to highlight as well that when I say under human care, I mean the direct one, since there are since the animals that are impacted by other human activity, like the impact of climate change, zoonotic diseases, or the decrease of their habitat, are all those are all part of the wider 99%. And it might help to visualize it like this. So with black in this figure, with black being the captive animals and blue being the wild ones, and this is all only the vertebrates. So the extent to which human activities impacts the welfare of the majority, these blue wild animals, or more specifically, if there is any that is not impacted by this activity, is currently unknown. And so the evolution of animal welfare science continues, now including also wild free-ranging animals. And now the focus moves to the need to better understand the lives of these wild animals, for what we still need better tools for monitoring and evaluating welfare states, very importantly, better indicators for welfare, and ways to infer subjective experiences. It is quite promising, though, that in the past few years, we have seen an increase in the number of organizations that are starting to have interest in this new field of wild animal welfare. And so in the future, we hope to be able to answer some of these questions and start a new chapter in this evolution of history. That is all from me. Hope you found this useful and interesting, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them later during the discussion. Thank you.